The mechanism of action down to the cellular level of norepinephrine. First, you have the receptor binding, again, which is where your alpha-1 adrenergic receptors and all your adrenergic receptors triggers a cascade of intracellular events, such as G protein coupled receptor pathways, which then lead to the activation of PLC or phospholipase C. The phospholipase C catalyzes conversion of PIP2 into secondary messengers such as IP3 and DAG. Then you have the calcium mobilization, which is where the IP3 stimulates the release of calcium ions into the sarcoplasmic reticulum and then into the cytoplasm. This increased cytoplasmic calcium concentration is crucial for muscle contraction, which ultimately leads to the myosin light chain kinase activation, which then further causes the smooth muscle contraction or the vasoconstriction. Hello, future CRNA. Welcome back to CRNA School Prep Academy podcast. I'm your host, Jenny Finnell, and today we're going to break down norepinephrine. This drug is a drug that you will use very frequently in the ICU. It is also a common drug that is asked during CRNA school interviews. And so we're going to deep dive into this drug today. And it's going to be a new teaching style. So if you're watching this on YouTube, I hope you enjoy. I would love to hear your feedback from that. And of course, just because I don't want you to have to worry about missing anything, I have provided a PDF version of the notes. Whether that's on YouTube or on the podcast, you should have access to click a link and grab the podcast notes. Okay, so as we break down norepinephrine, I want to point out that this comes, or you should be familiar with other names for this drug, the generic name and trade name, norepinephrine, Levophed, and then you also have noradrenaline, and some people just call it norepi. That's probably what I refer to it the most as. Norepi is just easier to say. It's more fun to say that way too. All right, so what is norepi? Norepi is a naturally occurring chemical in the body that acts as both a hormone and a neurotransmitter. When it's given as an IV medication, we can reproduce these effects. It's also considered a sympathomimetic medication, which essentially just means that it can mimic the effects of a hormone on the sympathetic nervous system. When we use it primarily as a vasopressor to increase blood pressure. It increases blood pressure, your SVR, your PVR. It increases your wedge pressure, your MAP, your mean arterial pressure, your CVP, your central venous pressure, your heart rate, cardiac output. One thing to kind of keep in mind when using norepinephrine or epi is that you can actually cause tachycardia with this drug, especially at higher doses. And the tachycardia can actually decrease your cardiac output due to the decreased time spent in diastole. Now, if you have someone who has a healthy, compliant heart, it's usually not as big of a deal, but if you're dealing with someone who has a hypertrophic heart of some kind or valvular dysfunction of some kind, tachycardia could be incredibly significant for them as far as increasing their oxygen demands on their body and potentially setting them up for cardiac ischemia. So you want to be very careful when choosing this drug that you're choosing it on the right patient. So how does norepi work? Norepi activates adrenergic receptors of the sympathetic nervous system. It's an endogenous hormone that, again, is found in our bodies anyways. We just give it via medication to mimic these effects. So adrenergic receptors stimulated by norepi include alpha-1, alpha-2, and beta-1, very little beta-2. But again, we're looking at mostly alpha-1, alpha-2, beta-1, and again, very little effects on beta-2. So alpha-1 is really where the majority of the effects come in from norepi, and alpha-1 is what causes that smooth muscle contraction of both the arterioles and the veins equally, which then leads to vasoconstriction or an increase in SVR and increased blood pressure. Now, alpha-2, it's more just like it inhibits further release of norepinephrine and serves as a mechanism of negative feedback. So that's kind of what alpha-2 does. So again, we mentioned both of them because it does stimulate both. However, alpha-2 is not really where the mechanism of action unfolds. It's more in the alpha-1. Now, beta-1, again, primarily affects the heart. And beta-1 is where you get the tachycardic effects from increased doses of norepinephrine. Beta-1 causes an increase in heart rate, which is also known as a positive chronotropic effect, and an increase in contractility, which is a positive inotropic effect. So increased heart rate is a positive chronotropic effect, and increased contractility is a positive inotropic effect. I would highly encourage you to use these terms when speaking about this drug, especially in the interview setting. It sounds a lot more informed than just saying it increases heart rate or increases contractility. So saying these key terms, again, I think can really highlight your advanced knowledge that you have about the mechanism of action of these drugs. So between the positive chronotropic effect and inotropic effect, it leads to an increase in cardiac output. So like I spoke to before, there's little effect on the beta-2 receptors. Beta-2 receptors, however, do cause smooth muscle relaxation and ultimately bronchial dilatation. So it also dilates arteries of skeletal muscle, hence your bronchioles, coronary and hepatic arteries. So that again is beta-2. If you think about beta-1 being you have one heart and beta-2, you have two lungs. That's kind of an easy way to remember beta-1, beta-2 if you haven't got that down yet. But just think of beta-2 again causes the bronchodilation or the relaxation of smooth muscle. All right. The affinity to bind to receptors is affected by concentration, temperature, and pH. Therefore, when your patient is kind of circling the toilet and getting more acidotic, you're going to see that you're going to have to titrate up on the Levophed, and that is why. So again, temperature plays into account pH as well as concentration of the drug. Let's get into the release and metabolism at this point. So the release comes from the cells called the crofamine cells. And the crofamine cells, like between norepinephrine and epinephrine, they're released from these cells within the adrenal medulla in proportions of approximately 20 to 80%, meaning 20% norepi and 80% epinephrine. So your body primarily releases epinephrine at 80% and norepinephrine at 20%. The crofamine cells are actually located in the adrenal medulla. And then again, they synthesize and release catecholamines such as epinephrine, norepinephrine, and dopamine. So that is crofamine cells. That is, again, where your norepinephrine is released from, which is inside of the adrenal medulla. Now let's get into the metabolism of norepinephrine. So there is an enzyme, MAO-A, which is monoamine oxidase type A, in the nerve terminals, again, that helps metabolize norepinephrine. You also have catecholomethyltransferase, and I'm probably butchering the names of these, so bear with me on there. The abbreviation is COMT in the liver and in plasma. And again, these are primarily responsible for the metabolism of norepinephrine. So for short, it's MAO and COMT. These are the two different types of enzymes that break down norepinephrine. You also have termination of norepinephrine, which first starts with diffusion of norepinephrine away from the adrenergic receptor. So the very first step to terminate norepinephrine from action is diffusion of norepinephrine away from the adrenergic receptor. The termination mechanisms is something I want you to star and take notes on, because this will come up on tests, is that the reuptake is the process that terminates 80% of the effects of norepinephrine. And you may be wondering, well, what is reuptake, Jenny? Reuptake is essentially the reabsorption of a neurotransmitter by a neurotransmitter transporter located along the plasma membrane of an axon terminal or a glial cell after it has performed its function of transmitting the neural impulse. So that is what reuptake is, and that is what is responsible for 80% of the termination of norepinephrine. Then you, again, have your metabolism, which we already kind of went over, which is the MAO, as well as the COMT, that, again, breaks down this drug both in the blood and in the liver. This is where the metabolism with those enzymes occur in the blood and in the liver. Lastly, you have the diffusion away from the receptors. So let's kind of go over that again. So you have the metabolism of norepinephrine with the breakdown with enzymes such as the MAO-A or the COMT. You have the diffusion away from the receptor sites, and the biggest one is the reuptake, which accounts for 80% of its termination. So that is how norepinephrine, again, is kind of broken down and terminated within your body. And now we're going to get into the mechanism of action at a cellular level. So let's go into that next. All right, first you have the receptor binding. All right, so when the receptor or when norepinephrine binds to alpha-1 adrenergic receptors, it triggers a cascade of intracellular events. This binding activates G protein-coupled receptor pathways, leading to the activation of phospholipase C, or PLC, so phospholipase C. Then you have the secondary messengers, which is that when the phospholipase C then catalyzes the conversion of called PIP2 into two secondary messengers, IP3 and DAG. Just remember DAG. So secondary messengers such as the phospholipase C catalyzes the conversion of PIP2 into two secondary messengers, IP3 and DAG. Then third, you have the calcium mobilization. All right, so calcium mobilization is kind of where the magic starts to happen. So IP3 stimulates the release of calcium ions from the sarcoplasmic reticulum into the cytoplasm. The increase in sarcoplasmic calcium concentration is crucial for muscle contraction. In vascular smooth muscle cells, calcium binds to calmodulin, activating myosin light chain kinase, or abbreviated MLCK, stands for myosin light chain kinase, MLCK. Then finally, you have your muscle contraction. So the myosin light chain kinase, the MLCK, phosphorylates light chains in the myosin heads, allowing the myosin heads to interact with actin filaments, leading to contraction. So when we're talking about vasopressors, we're looking at vascular smooth muscle. This contraction results in the vasoconstriction that we achieve by giving the vasopressor. Let me cover that one more time, because again, that was a lot of heavy information coming at you at once. I want to do another brief, quick overview. So the mechanism of action down to the cellular level of norepinephrine. First, you have the receptor binding, again, which is where your alpha-1 adrenergic receptors and all your adrenergic receptors triggers a cascade of intracellular events, such as G protein-coupled receptor pathways, which then lead to the activation of PLC or phospholipase C. The phospholipase C catalyzes conversion of PIP2 into secondary messengers such as IP3 and DAG, DAG. Then you have the calcium mobilization, which is where the IP3 stimulates the release of calcium ions into the sarcoplasmic reticulum and then into the cytoplasm. This increased cytoplasmic calcium concentration is crucial for muscle contraction, which ultimately leads to the myosin light chain kinase activation, which then further causes the smooth muscle contraction or the vasoconstriction. So that is down to the cellular level. It is all written for you clear as day in your PDF notes that you can get below.
Another daily dose of inspiration along your CRNA journey. It's finally my turn. I heard about CSBA back when it was still called ICU Dreaming About Anesthesia, back in 2019-2020. Life got in the way and I didn't end up applying. Years down the road, I wasn't sure if I was going to apply anymore or if CRNA was still the route I wanted to take. I decided I would apply finally this year just to see what happened and jumped back into CSBA. I got into 2 dream schools here in California. I applied to 3 schools total, 2 acceptances, and will not be taking the 3rd interview. My stats are average, 3.3 GPA, 301 GRE, CCRN, leadership positions at my hospital, local Sigma Theta Tau, retook a class and did a lot of interview prep through CSBA, which is through Nurses Teach Nurses and with CRNA friends. It is doable. Believe in your dreams, invest in yourself. Thank you, Jenny, Dr. Wilson, and team. I could not have done it without you. And thank you to this community for your supportive nature and advice. I am grateful forever. Thank you so much for sharing the story. Congratulations, you know who you are. And I'm so proud that, again, you took the chance on yourself to just apply and see what happened. And I really think this kind of strikes me as someone who maybe is unsure, right? So maybe the question of CRNA is for them because they feel so unsure about whether they'd be successful or not. And I think this is a very common experience that people don't know if it's for them because they're not certain if maybe they're cut out for it. Maybe they think they're not smart enough or they don't have the best experience or the best leadership or whatever it is. But I can't say this enough that if you don't at least give yourself a chance, you're never going to be able to address potential shortcomings. And it's one of those, and I don't even call them shortcomings, but like, for example, if you never tried to make a basketball team when you were younger, would you have ever made a basketball team? No, you wouldn't. You would never have, because maybe you would try to make the basketball teams and you'd realize, oh, I'm not very good at slam dunking, or I'm not very good at dribbling, or I don't know, whatever. So quote unquote shortcomings or areas for improvement would be, you would never know what it is you need to focus on to make the basketball team. It's similar, you guys. You would never know what it is you need to improve upon to make it into CRNA school if you don't at least start the process of trying. So that's what I hope to leave you with, and I hope you guys enjoyed, and back to the show.
All right, now we're going to kind of wrap this up with some dosing, and then we're going to cover some common uses. And finally, I'm going to go over some formulas that I feel like you should make sure you know. All right. So dosing, some important things to know about dosing is that the half-life is 2.5 minutes. And then when you do a continuous infusion, you achieve a steady state plasma concentration. You can mix Levophed in various concentrations. You can do 4 milligrams, 8 milligrams, 16 milligrams, 32 milligrams in a 250 ml bag. You will see it at all different types of concentrations. So how many mics per ml would each of these concentrations make? I'm going to challenge you to kind of think through that for a second while I take a drink of water. All right, so I'm going to teach you a trick if you don't already know it. It makes this so easy, like really, really easy. And it only works for 250, so don't get too excited. For any drug that you put into a 250 ml bag, to get the mics per ml, all you need to do is simply multiply it, the milligrams by 4. So if you have 4 milligrams in 250, you take 4 times 4, which is 16 mics per ml. If you have 8 milligrams in 250, you times that by 4 and get 32 mics per ml. 16, you get 64 mics per ml. 32 milligrams in 250, you get 128 mics per ml, and so on and so on. So anything in 250 allows a very, very simple conversion into mics per ml. If you're giving this as an IV infusion, you're looking at 1 to 30 mics per minute, or 0.02 mics per kilo per minute, up to 1 mic per kilo per minute. The way you give this medication is going to vary from facility to facility. So just make sure you understand the protocols, again, that are at your facility, or why you're using the medication. So what's your use case of it? And one benefit of using it at low doses is the fact that you have less tachycardia with that. So again, at higher doses, you will definitely get the tachycardia along with it. All right, so some common uses for norepinephrine include hypotension and shock. It's primarily used for the vasoconstriction. Again, it stimulates alpha-1, beta-1. It increases SVR, which increases your blood pressure and MAP. It's most commonly used for distributive shock, which is sepsis. Cardiogenic shock may be counterintuitive because due to the increase in afterload, it'll make the heart failure worse. Last, we're going to get into some formulas I feel like you guys should know. Your SVR, which is 80 times MAP minus CVP divided by cardiac output. And again, your systemic vascular resistance, normal levels are 900 to 1200 dynes per second. Okay, so that's peripheral vascular resistance and SVR. Next, we're going to move on to some cardiac formulas I think you should make note of, which is cardiac output, which is just stroke volume times heart rate, which may seem really basic, but this is a common question that could be asked on interviews. Also, what is stroke volume? Meaning, what's the formula for stroke volume? You should know the average stroke volume, Normal is about 70 mLs. But again, stroke volume, how to figure that out? It's the end diastolic volume minus the end systolic volume. And then lastly, what is the ejection fraction, the EF? This is your stroke volume divided by your end diastolic volume. So the EF, again, is your stroke volume divided by your end diastolic volume. That is your ejection fraction. All right. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and best of luck to you. I hope you feel more comfortable with norepinephrine. We're going to do epinephrine next, and then we're going to go into neo. So I'm excited to share these other drugs with you. Take care. Hey, future CRNA, as always, I appreciate you and your loyalty. Thank you so very much for tuning in this week. I'd love to hear from you, so screenshot this episode and share it to your IG stories with your biggest takeaway. Don't forget to tag me at CRNA School Prep Academy so I can personally thank you. Be sure to head over to CRNASchoolPrepAcademy.com to check out our blog and gather free resources to help you along your CRNA journey. Stay strong, and I'll see you next week.